Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum. In today's episode, I am doing an artist interview with Neal Auch. I found Neal because I follow Joshua Marcella on Twitter, and he did one of his photos was used for one of Josh's books, Hunger for Death. And so I started following him and seeing the things that he was posting, and I thought it was really funny and interesting and neat. So, and he was kind enough to want to spend time and chat with me for a little bit. So here we are. So yeah, let's
Thank you for having me. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this. I'm pumped. I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's really hard to schedule stuff like this in general, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, let's just give me like a brief introduction to, what your art form is, what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I'm a photographer primarily. I do a lot of writing sort of in connection with the art, although I guess I am primarily a visual artist.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to sort of give you like the one sentence kind of elevator pitch that I usually give people, is that essentially what I'm doing is I'm trying to recreate like 17th century Dutch still life.
Mm-hmm.
I appropriate pretty much everything I can from that genre. I borrow a lot of the aesthetics, the iconography, and my work is very much informed by like the philosophical ideas that underpin those paintings.
Okay.
But sort of the big idea, the what I'm bringing to the table that's somewhat new, I guess, is that I'm trying to filter that through sort of a more edgy, confrontational sort of horror fan informed lens. So I guess to keep it as the shortest version I can think of is, Dutch 17th century Dutch still life, but with a lot more gore, basically is kind of what I'm going for.
Yeah. Was Josh's like using your photography for his cover? Was that the first time you had done anything for a book cover?
I've done now 3 book covers.
Oh, okay.
The most recent one that came out was Anderson Prunty C.V. Hunt, a book called Neat Photo. Interestingly, that was actually the first image that I licensed, and I think it's about like 4 years old now. So it had a very long and complicated history until it finally made it out into the world. But that just came out 2 or 3 days ago, I think.
Oh, okay.
I did the image with Josh was actually the 3rd one that I did, and I did a cover for a book called The Mud Ballad by Joe Quinnell. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing the last name there. Apologies to Joe. I have no idea how that's meant to be said, Quinnell or Quinnell, but anyway, yeah. I've done 3 now. I'm open to doing more. It's been a lot of fun, but that was sort of. That was what got me onto Twitter, and that was what sort of got me bubbled in with horror writers. And then it's been a lot of fun because I've sort of had a hard time. What I do is a little weird and a little niche, and I've had a hard time kind of finding the audience that it connects to. And horror writers seem to be a big part of that audience, so that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, the kind of indie horror world was a big boost for me as well. I've technically had the channel for a year, but I started following Josh on Twitter, like, I don't know, just not that long ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And I thought, okay, well, I wanted to do some other interviews and meet some other people and start engaging more. So I had reached out about doing a video. He said yes. And then it kind of like from there, I just started meeting a lot of other people. And the like indie horror writing world has been like a very big part of my community and a huge influence on and a part of my growth in the last like 3 months. So yeah, they're pretty great. I can definitely see like them all being very like pumped about what you do.
It's a really fascinating community, and I spent a long time sort of trying to fit myself into the niche of what's sort of called dark art online, and not find it like I could probably write a book at this stage with things that I think are a little off about that community, but maybe I won't go. But just to say that the level of difference and how much better and more supportive and cooler and more progressive and just more interesting and thoughtful the people are in like the indie horror scene, it's like night and day. It's really it's an amazing group of people from what I've
Yeah.
seen anyway. They all seem really cool, and there's a whole network, and they all seem
I
very
know.
thoughtful and supportive.
Yeah, the support has been a big one, and I think it's like everybody I've talked to feels the same way. So
Mhm.
I don't feel like it's just this like small group, and then like everyone else sucks. It's like I feel like it's a really common experience. That's a really good thing. It definitely makes you feel like you have a little bit of a place in it all. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, yeah.
If you had to say kind of other than the Dutch part of it, like what other if you were trying to explain the type of themes that are in your photos and what you do, like what other things would you tell people to kind of expect if they were coming to look at your art for the first or see your pictures
Yeah,
for the first time or
yeah.
you know.
I, I think maybe it's useful to give a bit of a background on
Sure.
what's going into those sort of Dutch paintings to kind of explain what I'm riffing on. I think maybe.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so you know, just so everyone knows what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about 17th century Dutch still life, I'm thinking of, when you go to the museum and you go to the boring section of the museum, and there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures of like laid breakfast tables and fruit baskets
And
and
fruits.
flower
Yeah.
bouquets, and just
Yeah.
iterated over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that stuff, there's a tendency to look at it from a contemporary perspective and think, oh, that's really quaint, isn't that cute? Like pretty
Sure.
flowers, pretty fruit.
Yeah.
But if you really dig into it, the what underpins these paintings is often quite grim. Like
Yeah.
even when you're just looking at a floral bouquet, okay, it's pretty flowers, but there's an implication there that the flowers will not last very long. They'll
Right.
fade. And if we sit with this a little bit longer, I think there's an implication that life is very much like the flowers. There's in some sense there's a lament about the brevity of life and how
Mm-hmm.
short-lived beautiful things are. And
Yeah.
in case you think I'm stretching here, this idea is like explicitly biblical. This is
Mm-hmm.
the audiences for these would have been mostly Protestant and Catholic, and this is in the book of Job. There's man comes forth as a flower and is cut down, and in the prophet Isaiah, there's all flesh is grass, and all its beauty is like the
Yeah.
grass. The
Yeah.
grass withers and the flower fades. So this analogy between the beauty of the flower or the fruit and the short-lived beauty of life is it's not reaching. It really is
Right.
embedded into these works. And as you dig, as you move through these boring part of the museum, you'll see this being made more and more explicit. Sometimes the flowers are put next to skulls. Sometimes you have extinguished candles. Often
Yeah.
on these laid breakfast tables, you will see like a pocket watch in there. No one eats breakfast with a pocket watch sitting next to
Sure.
the bread and the cheese. That's supposed to remind you that these things time is passing. These things will not be there for very long.
Yeah.
So this sort of baked into the history of still life is this idea that it's about death, it's about decay, it's about the brevity of life and the transience of all beautiful things. So the problem is, though, when we look at it from contemporary eyes, we don't see the sort of the death haunted part of this. We
Right.
see pretty flowers, because nowadays when people paint flower bouquets, mostly they just mean like, look at these nice flowers, and there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. But the sort of the iteration on still life that I'm trying to do is to take this same sort of philosophy, this idea of meditating on the shortness of life, of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about transience, and make it a lot more in your face and a lot more sort of obvious to an audience who,
Mm-hmm.
we grew up with Saw and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and torture
Sure.
porn films and stuff, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's not enough to put a wilted flower to have that really come
To
through
yeah.
to a
Yeah.
contemporary audience. So
Yeah.
to be, I guess, to describe it to someone who hasn't seen it, what I'm doing are arrangements very much inspired by these like Dutch breakfast tables, but then with gore, with bones, with mummified animals,
Mm-hmm.
with human teeth, with more explicit, sort of heavy-handed
Yeah.
symbols of death and mortality. And a lot of
Yeah.
these also actually were in those classical paintings. There are skulls, there are human remains.
Sure. Right.
There were a lot of classical paintings of game and butcher scenes and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's just kind of it's an update where I try to keep the philosophy and the aesthetics, but I try and sort of wash it over with kind of a horror movie, Texas Chainsaw kind of vibe.
Yeah, almost like something you would see in the backgrounds, like something you would see like in a film like that. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I definitely have seen I've been to museums, I've gone to art shows. I definitely wouldn't have necessarily thought that far into still life in that way. Like I've always thought about the fact that like if you're doing something like that, if you are painting, I don't know, like a bowl of fruit, like you're limited in the time that you have to do it for that reason because
Mhm.
it's going to die very quickly depending on what it is or how ripe it is or whatever. So
Mhm.
I remember seeing the first because the first thing I had like my eyes on that you did was the photo for Hunger for Death,
Mhm.
and I was just like it was so crazy to think about how captivating it was without even really understanding why at first. And then it's like, like it was just one of those things where it took a minute for me to even really process why I liked it so much.
Mhm.
And then that was, of course, when I started following you and I started looking at other things that you had done. And it is
Thank you so much for that, by the way. You're too kind.
Oh yeah, no, I loved it. I definitely yeah, when I was thinking about doing artist interviews for this year, I thought about all kinds of different forms of art. Like I didn't want to just do digital artist or a
Mhm.
painter, like I wanted to do like kind of these well-rounded and this is I'm not like blowing smoke. Like you were actually the first person on my list because I was so fascinated by what I saw and it
Yeah.
was so different from anything that I saw and it's like right up my alley. So I was like, this is great. I'm gonna message him. Like,
I exist in that space where a lot of people don't care for it, but the people that care for it like it a lot. That's kind
or
of
really dig it. Yeah. I can see that. I could see it
it's a
being a
double-edged sword. I mean, it's good to have people really enthusiastic, but
yeah.
you have to burn through a lot of people that really hate it to get to that
Oh,
audience.
I'm sure. No, I'm sure. And it's yeah, and I can imagine when you're doing something that kind of raw, like yeah, I can imagine. Not everybody's going to be susceptible or understand or want to understand or even be willing to look at it outside of it being this disturbing image they don't want to look at. So I get that. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I also understand what is off-putting about this for
Yeah.
people. I don't blame anyone for not wanting to look at some of this stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
also like I'm super desensitized, so it's very hard for me to like put myself back in the space of
Right.
not finding this sort of thing shocking, I guess.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. I imagine you would be doing it for yeah, anything longer than like a few photos, you get used to it. Yeah, I can see that. Makes
I've
sense.
smelled some things in my life.
Oh, I didn't even think that's true. I didn't even think about that. That's fair. Um, so like how did you get into doing this type of photography? Like did you go like are you classically trained? Are you, self-taught? Like how did that kind of come about for you?
Yeah, I took a very unusual trajectory to get here. So
Okay.
my educational background is actually in theoretical physics. By
Okay.
training, I'm a physicist. I have a PhD. I worked in academia for years.
Wow, okay.
I did a lot of sort of particle physics, cosmology, a little bit of sort of mathematical physics.
Whoa, okay.
So my background is it's completely the least artistic thing you can imagine. In fact, that my tiny brush with physics fame here, if I can throw that in, is the last post that I had in academia. I worked in Cambridge at
Uh,
the Department of Applied Math and Theoretical Physics, and I was in
okay.
the office next to Stephen Hawking during the last. I don't think it was the last year of his life, but it was very very much towards the end of his life. So that was kind
Yeah.
of my brush with fame, where fame here is being defined by a physicist's standards, I guess.
That's
Mm.
really cool though.
Yeah, it was fun. But so anyway, yeah, my training is not artistic at all.
Okay.
I was in physics and eventually got very sort of disillusioned with the field, and I wanted to try something new, and I wanted to try
Mhm.
something very new. I wanted to sort of shake up my life,
Okay.
and the normal thing that people do when they leave the kind of job that I have
Okay.
is that they go and they work for a hedge fund as what's called a quant, which is basically like doing math modeling of the stock market.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
so that is sort of the most practical thing that the skill set that I had would have been applicable to.
Yeah.
And that would have been certainly a lot more profitable than trying to make, still life with roadkill. And it probably would have been easier
Well, yeah,
to break into also.
Yeah.
Because all my friends did that. But I wanted to try something different, and I didn't really love the idea of, spending your days helping very rich people become slightly richer by gambling.
That's fair.
It didn't appeal to me. I don't hold it against the people who do that.
Yeah.
My
Just
friends
wasn't going to be for you. Yeah.
It just wasn't what I wanted to be doing with my time. And so I came back to Canada after I left the job at Cambridge, and I just started doing artsy things. I did a little bit of data stuff on the side to pay the rent. And I started doing art things. I got a camera, and I bought a camera mostly because I wanted to decorate the apartment that I was in. Like, my idea was just to make art just for me, just to put it all behind me.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of other things. I wrote, I had a weird journalistic project that never went anywhere. I wrote a completely unpublishable book of erotica at one point. I composed music. I was working on electronic music for a while. And this, the photography, I didn't really intend it to be my main thing, but I would dump whatever I was doing sort of out into the world. And this was, people sort of reacted to this, and it seemed to, it was the thing that seemed to get the most enthusiasm from people. And so I eventually started pushing down that further and further. And it just kind of developed on its own. I was doing something like still life pretty early into this. They were quite crude and rudimentary, and I didn't really have a deep understanding of the art history and the philosophy of the images. So they were not, I think they were not as rich or as interesting as I hope what I'm doing now is. It just kind of developed organically. I tried a lot of things. I threw a lot of shit at the wall, and this was the shit that seemed to stick.
Yeah. So when you first started doing photos, did it start out this way, or was it a lot more, I don't want to say simpler, because that's not really what I mean, but just I guess just different, like a different feeling to it?
Yeah, they were fairly, I mean, the idea of these sort of creepy still life was with me fairly early.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. It just, I sort of got really fascinated by that whole Dutch scene, and they were very simple at the starting out. They weren't these big, like, laid tables. One or two items just there, and I was sort of learning how to use the lights and that sort of thing. But it I don't know, it sort of formed fairly quickly. I had a bunch of other ideas for more sort of explicitly political projects that I wanted to do, that none of them really worked out for a bunch of reasons. And then this thing just kind of, I don't know, I went down the rabbit hole on it.
And then
and it's still life is one of these things where, even when you look at these old paintings, it's the same items just reorganized, and you can just keep iterating on it over and over. And this idea of, putting reminders of mortality next to different items to sort of create meaning through the juxtaposition. You can just keep sort of iterating on that and playing with it in different ways. And I got really fascinated by that. You'll see a lot of these old paintings where it's like coins and money next to a human skull and an extinguished candle. And so there's sort of this implication, like, what good is the pursuit of wealth when the same fate awaits?
This is the end. Yeah, that's what it looks like in the end.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I played with that sort of, doing the coins, but also you can apply this to more contemporary things. You can, I did a project with sort of corporate mascots and symbols of nationalism. And I did a thing with NFTs, some sort of popular NFTs. Because, what contemporary thing could speak to sort of meaninglessness and vanity more than spending 6 figures on a monkey JPEG Twitter ball, right? So I sort of fell down the rabbit hole with this idea that you can really sort of take those basic elements and rearrange them,
Yeah.
and try to make something that's more relevant to people in 2022, hopefully.
Yeah. I think, it's funny you say that. Hadn't really thought about that part either, but I noticed, like, when I look at, like, when I've gone to your website and I've looked at the photos and stuff that you have up, I will link all of Neal's information below, by the way. So you're right though, like taking even similar concepts as far as like how you've done the I'm trying to think of a specific example, but it's like there's different, it's like it's the same I'm thinking, like, instead of flowers, I don't know exactly what it is that you used. It's not flowers though. It looks like some kind of
the chicken feet and trachea.
chicken feet. That's it. So there's a couple, like, so when looking at those as this representation of like of what they almost look like, from like a distance, and then seeing them used in different ways, it's moving it or putting it next to something else really does change like the overall way that you're looking at it. And I guess I hadn't really thought about that until you said that. But yeah, no, to your point, like that's a really interesting thing that keeps, like, because everything, I feel like when you look at all of them as you're scrolling or, going through the sections, it's like, it's all engaging. Like you find yourself like looking at all of it and paying attention, and it invokes, like, each one feels different, even if it's got similar elements. So that's true. That definitely is. That's an effective thing for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, that, by the way, that thing with the flowers with the chicken feet, that also, as a callback to the earlier point, we were talking about this biblical ideas, this all flesh is grass. That was essentially the basis for that series. The idea was, okay, there's this metaphorical analogy between flowers and flesh, and that the point of that series was to like make that really literal, to build flowers out of flesh, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's an example of, I think it would have been understandable to an audience in the 17th century on some level, but it's kind of filtered and twisted around in a way that I enjoy anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably my favorite. Those are probably my favorites, I think. And I really do like the fact that it does take you like it took me a second to realize what it was at first. But I think I mean that in like a good way. Like because it's like, it's almost like finding this little moment of comfort, and then you're like, oh shit, never mind. But I mean that as a horror fan, that's like a big compliment. Like I love that's like, when it's like watching something with a concept that you've seen 100 times, and then the filmmakers rip the rug out and you're like thrown in the air and you had no idea. It's kind of the same feeling, just in, photograph instead of film.
Thank you. Thanks. I actually did a series where I made a point. I just used like dry flowers and pewter cups and containers and things. And I made a point to do a whole series where I left out the really creepy dead things and the bones, just because I wanted to have something that I could show for somebody where it was like, here I'm making the point, but it's not quite so like
in your face.
Yeah, it's not quite so in your face. It's not quite so creepy. I get a lot of people when I do galleries and shows. I get a lot of people come by the table that are like, "This is beautiful. I really like this, but I could not have this hanging on my wall." And I get it, right? Like, not everybody wants to have like a 20 by 30 picture of a mummified raccoon hanging above the mantle. I mean, that's what I have on my mantle, but
that's fair. Yeah. I think, like, so whenever you're getting ready to do these setups, like where do you get your materials? Like, I'm assuming you have multiple ways, but like, what does that look like as far as being able to obtain these, like, not target priced items,
So yeah, a lot of it is just scavenge from the woods.
Oh, okay.
I go for a lot of walks, you bring a garbage bag, and if I find some bones or something, some pretty dead thing, a lot of that gets brought home with me. I have a little freezer behind this wall with all that stuff. So a lot of it is just scavenged. I sort of say roadkill in a joking way, but that more or less is what most of it is. It's things that I just find out in the woods. I'm also sort of plugged into a community of what they call vulture culture. There's a community of people that are sort of into this stuff who do like make jewelry out of bones or teeth.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Taxidermists. So I have a bunch of friends who are involved in this kind of activity in a similar way. And often if they find things that are not useful for them, but useful for me, I sometimes get things donated to me. I sometimes trade art for, somebody found a pretty skeleton somewhere in the woods, and I'll make a picture with it and we can trade off that way.
Yeah.
It's also useful because I have a friend who does jewelry with scavenged animal bones. But for her, she needs stuff that's in good shape. She needs she needs things intact. For me, if it's stained, if it's rotting, if it's broken,
it's even better.
more texture, more that's
yeah.
So that's sort of where a lot of it's coming from. There's a bit that's sort of byproduct from the butcher shop. There are a lot.
Okay, that one I had kind of was thinking might have been a resource, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So like the pig's heads and this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's kind of This
is a byproduct of the pork industry, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. I've some human teeth. I got a lot of questions. I did a series of like real close-ups with human teeth. And I had a lot of people I was surprised that was the thing where people got sort of antsy and sort of asking about the ethics and the legality. And like, just to be totally clear, it is completely legal and it's ethical. I hang out at the nightclub with chloroform, and you knock the person out, you yank them up with me. And I always slip like a 20 in the wallet when I'm doing it, so like
just to cover it for their troubles.
Yeah, no, I mean, so that is obviously completely ethical. Right? No, I don't know. I never understood why people freaked out about that. They come from the dentist, right? They're extractions. You can.
Yeah, right.
They're just before I get canceled or whatever. The other thing about abducting people and stealing their teeth was a joke. They come from the dentist's office. It's perfectly legal to get teeth from the dentist, and in fact, you can kind of infer this as you look at the pictures because the teeth are all fucked up. They're all cracked and they have a lot of damage to them.
I think
because nobody gets a healthy tooth pulled, right?
Yeah, it's not going to look perfect. That makes sense. Huh. Dentist. I didn't even think about the teeth when I asked that either.
It was funny. I posted those images. They're fairly old pictures, and I was really surprised. I posted them, and I didn't even think to sort of justify where the teeth were coming from. And there were just like a lot of people reacting like, "Oh my God, how are you getting teeth? Are you taking people's teeth?" And just like, "Oh my good God, like, no, I am much too pretty to be like yanking people's teeth."
Oh no. Isn't it crazy to think though? I mean, I get it. Like not everybody's going to get what you're doing or like it or understand it or whatever. But at the same time, you're just kind of like, come on. What do you think I'm doing? Like, and then and it makes it kind of funny because you're like, I have a fridge behind me that I put stuff in.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a roadkill fridge.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
I could point to the prop acquisition. I guess that's probably worth mentioning. Is we were talking about this reorganizing and reiterating the same things. There's not really that many pieces in the collection. Like if you go through those pictures, you will see the same handful of items just getting rearranged and reorganized over and over and over again. So that it's not that I need to be spending thousands of hours out in the woods to find this stuff.
Oh, that's fair.
Purchasing loads of whatever. I have a pretty small amount of props here, and it looks like more because they're just getting moved around.
Sure. I think I
freeze and thaw it out like that. I've been using some of the same props now for 4 years.
Huh. So like when you're doing these rearrangements, like do you have anything that like strikes you as an inspiration, or do you just kind of go in like I'm going to do something different and then you just play around until you figure out what you want it to look like?
Yeah, so it used to be that when I got started with this, I would just
Mhm.
kind of stick things and let it come to me on the
Okay.
table. At
Yeah.
this stage, they are quite meticulously planned,
Oh,
and
okay.
I do these in sort of mini series. I have a bunch of things sort of themed around a similar idea, and I'll do
Yeah.
a series of them and typically write a little essay or a story or something to go along
Yeah.
with it. So at this stage, I
Yeah.
typically have like the props are planned out well in advance.
Yeah.
The elements are planned out. Often, even I have a sort of vague sketch for the how I'm going to arrange things.
Okay.
So at this stage, it is really there's not much that's spontaneous about it.
Okay. It's probably an obvious one that I didn't even think about, but how long have you been doing these?
Oh God, that's a good question.
Because
Quite a while.
you've said at this stage multiple times, and I'm like, well, and you said it's been 4 years for that one photo that you talked about. So I was like, how long? I just thought about that. I was like, that's such a duh question. I don't know why I didn't think about that.
Yeah, maybe about 6 years. I think now I've been
Oh,
sort of
okay.
playing around with versions of this. I have
Yeah.
I've sort of had my different balls in the air. So still life is kind of the main thing, but I've done enough of this now that those still lifes are like broken into subcategories. You know, these fleshy flowers, or
Yes. The yeah.
more riffing, these vanitas, more riffing on this sort of moralizing aspect of these old Dutch paintings.
Hmm.
But I also do a lot of sort of close-up, more abstract work. So I do a lot of very close-up imagery of like bone sort of it,
Yeah.
everything when you get really close ends up looking like a landscape. So I think of these as sort of bone landscapes or sort of abstract fleshy landscapes.
Yeah. That's not a yeah. Yeah. I think like so one of the other things I was going to ask was where you started and kind of how it changed, but I feel like we kind of talked about that a little bit mostly because you
Yeah,
talked about like where you started. Well, coming from having this other, going to school and having a PhD and going into this field, and then coming into this world of art, as it were.
mhm.
What advice would you give somebody like trying to come into the world, like, and that's whether they know what they want to do or not, but just maybe something that if somebody had said it to you might would have been helpful.
If somebody had said it to me, I write about what you do. I think would be one tip that I would give. Like spend a lot of time writing and
Yeah.
about what you're producing, uh,
Okay.
because you know the story that goes along with an image does as much work in selling the image, I think, as the thing itself does.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if I appreciated when I was starting out how important that
Oh,
was. And in fact, when I first started out, I had this idea, oh, the art speaks for itself. And I just had a website that was just images and I didn't want to explain my motivations. And I
yeah.
felt like it sort of detracts from the work to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I have basically come completely 180 on this.
Yeah.
I'm now of the opinion that like I write these little essays and they go out in a sort of semi-regular mailing on my mailing list, and
Yeah.
I will spell out every single, why did I put the dice over here in that arrangement? Like, why is this cupcake
Yeah.
over there? Like, I will happily explain every little nicety
Yeah.
to anyone who will listen. I completely like 180 from this idea of just let the art speak for itself. Now I lean very hard into letting me speak for the art, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you have people that are like, it's kind of, art is subjective. You look at two people can look at something and walk away with totally different things. It's like, and that's fine if that's what you're hoping to get out of it. But I can see it being one of those things where, like if you were looking at something, you ought like some people would probably need an explanation to find it, um, enticing enough to continue to look at or to look at more of it, to kind of be like, because I think the perspective and the way that you explain it, even in just the little bit that you've said, I feel like it already makes it to me more intriguing, like understanding what message you're trying to convey and why you do it this way, I think is, I think that's, I can see that being helpful to people who maybe wouldn't continue to look because they didn't understand or they couldn't come up with their own thoughts or weren't able to see past it being so unique. So that's an interesting one.
For me, at least, this advice may not work for.
Oh, sure. No, sure. Yeah.
I think also that this idea is somewhat consistent with the history of still life again. Like the audiences at the time would have, there's almost like a dictionary to reading those old Dutch.
Oh, yeah.
And audiences at the time would have known how to sort of decode and interpret these. So there's a sense in which it is a very unsubtle genre. It is, you know, you put a pile of coins next to a human skull. That's not a subtle critique of community. That's fairly heavy-handed. So I sort of lean into that. Also, like the nature of the genre is to kind of slap you in the face with what you're trying to do. So I think I'm not sure, but I feel like I'm sort of following in the tradition.
I think I'm inclined to agree. It's very, and I think it's funny too, because like even going through the different albums that you have on your website, like there are still like it's that comfort and that removal of comfort, because I feel like I'm getting an idea of what you do. Mm-hmm. And there's I don't remember what the album is called, but it's the one with people. Mm-hmm. Like when I got to that one, I was like, this is not what I was expecting to see. It was completely different. And it was, but I say that to say that like, it's, you know, I don't know. The in your face is to me, I think that's part of the appeal. I like weird. Like I don't know. I'm drawn to it. So I think it's easier for me, but it's one of those things that like, that's one of the things I like about it is so it makes you go, what? Or like, you just have, you know, like.
I haven't worked with a lot of models, but the handful of models I've worked with have been real troopers.
I can see that. Are the people that you know, like you knew beforehand? Like how did you have those conversations? Because
I did work with a few people that I met on sort of modeling sites.
Oh, okay.
It was hard to find candidates in that way for kind of obvious reasons.
Sure.
A lot of those images aren't on the site anymore, but most of what remains there was a woman who I worked with who I've met on. She's local. She's a model.
Oh, okay.
Here, and we had sort of connected on one of these sites. And one of the other model who's in several images on the website is an old friend of mine, and they were willing to do a lot of interesting things. So we had some fun and made some weird art.
Yeah, I think if I was going to be willing to do something like that for somebody, it would have to be somebody that I knew. I don't think I could do it for somebody I didn't know.
Yeah, there's an issue of establishing trust to do this.
Yes, that's more. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Yeah, it is. It's that one. That one threw me off when like I said, I thought I knew what I was going to continue to see, and then it was like, no. But I think that's a good.
Warning for those playing along at home. Some of that is NSFW, and you may see some naked people.
Yes. Yeah. So just don't, scream or show it to your boss at work. You at this point, like I know you said that you got kind of a reaction, and that was kind of why you dived more into the photography piece of it and like doing it more. What is, like, if you had to say, just from people, and this can be from people who love it, get it, or people who don't love it, but what do you think like would be something you hope people get out of it when they're looking at things that you do?
So I'm gonna get pretentious here for
okay.
This is on you. If you didn't want someone getting pretentious about roadkill, then you shouldn't have invited me on.
Fair enough.
I'm teasing, but so there's this old story that like the Roman general coming back from being victorious in battle would be riding on the chariot on his victory laps around town, and as the story goes, they would have a slave sort of stand behind him and whisper in his ear, "You're going to die. Remember that you're going to die."
Yeah.
And the idea is, part of it is sort of a call to humility. but it's also a part of sort of a longer philosophical tradition of the idea that there's just some value in sort of reflecting on mortality. And I think there's something to that, because there's a sense in which, you know, the fact that life is finite is kind of what gives it meaning, right? The fact that you only have a certain amount of time is the reason that it matters what you do with your time, because now you have to choose, what am I going to choose to value? Is it
What's worth it? Yeah.
What's worthwhile to me? How do I build meaning
Yeah.
for myself in this short time that I have?
Yeah.
And there's a whole tradition of art called memento mori art that is just meant to operate in the same way as that slave standing behind the general, just sitting there on your wall telling you, you're going to die, you're going to die. Think about, you know, think about your books and your wisdom and your learning. Does that matter? Think about your money. Think about your pursuit of wealth. Does that matter?
Yeah.
And it's not to say that those things don't matter. It's to invite the question, I think. So what I'm doing is, you know, this is a very old tradition in art, and I'm sort of doing my own iteration of that. So like a part of what I would like people to get out of it is just that is like the Roman slave, is this, just to invite you to think about your mortality. So that's kind of why I do this. That's the big motivation for me.
Yeah.
There's a secondary part of it that's also a little bit like, I think there's an aspect of this that's like looking for beauty in unlikely places. Like, I think a lot of these subjects that I work with are not conventionally beautiful things. You know, the mummified raccoon head that I found in the parking lot somewhere here. But I think if you really get down to it and look at these things, there is a kind of beauty to them. And I think there's some value in sort of reflecting on the way in which almost anything can be really pretty if you put nice light on it and put it in a nice setting, right? So I guess this is kind of my messaging, I guess.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I don't know if this is a stretch or just my own like perception of it, but I think it's kind of interesting to think about what that can invoke when not using human remains too, because you know, there are plenty of times where humanity is like, we are the superior, and, you know, I don't know, fuck all the animals, like whatever, however we feel about those kinds of things. But thinking about looking at a raccoon in that situation, or that mouse on, you know, laying across the scene, like looking at something that is not at all what we are and still being able to go, that's me. Like, I know that's like a bit of a stretch, but it's one of those things where you think about like, like this universal concept of we are all on, you know, borrowed time, as far as eventually this is going to be what happens to us too. It's just going to look slightly different.
I don't think that's a stretch at all. That's essentially what I'm going after. And in fact, again, to quote scripture, speaking of pretentious, I'm going to quote some more scripture here. This is in Ecclesiastes, which would have been a major source of inspiration for a lot of painters. And I'm going to butcher the line, but there's something, there's no man and animal have the same breath, as one dies, so dies the other. There's no between us. This is really, this is in the sort of underpinnings of the history of this work.
Yeah. I like that part of it actually a lot, because it's interesting what looking at something that really doesn't look anything like you and still just being able to relate to it. And like, because it's like, it's, you know, I don't know, looks like a little, what do they say in The Lion King? He's like, we become the grass. Like everything is like the circle of life.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, that's
the Disney version.
Lion King and Ecclesiastes. It's basically the same. No, but it is the same message, more or less.
Yeah, it's just, you know, just different, a little different.
I need a lot of shit for this. Also, every time I quote the Bible, I get people yelling at me.
Why? Because of the photographs, or just because people just?
No, because people don't like when a lot of people in my orbit are not religious, and I'm not religious either.
No, I'm not either.
But I engage with it in a serious way because it's I think a part of the genre. I think it's a part of those
Sure.
paintings. But yeah, every time when I get too scriptural and start to sound like I'm preaching at people, then I typically get a little.
Oh yeah.
People get a little.
Yeah. I guess people get a little sensitive about that. I said, but
And
yeah.
I get, look, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm very not religious, and I'm very not into the institutions as they are today.
Yeah.
So I get why people are a little agitated about those things.
Yeah, and I think because I've been the way I am about religion for so long, I think I kind of look at it as just it would be no different than quoting like I don't know, like a Greek mythos or something, or telling a story about, comparing something of that nature to whatever it is that you're discussing in that time or in that moment. But I think it's kind of like that's how I look at it, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah.
Unless it is someone actually
Yeah.
preaching, but in this instance, like that's kind of how it's like that's kind of how it's being perceived, at least to me. Just
Yeah, that is how I I read the Bible in connection to this work, and I read it
yeah,
very much like as a text, like not
uh,
as
yes,
something that came down from God or whatever, but just
sure,
as a text with
yeah,
some that can be interpreted as a text and has some terrible shit in there, but it does also have a few, like Ecclesiastes genuinely is an interesting book. And there
yeah,
are some interesting ideas in there, and they're mixed in with a lot of terrible, terrible shit also. But
yeah, yeah.
like any book, we can read the parts that we find value in.
Yeah. And then use the parts that you like when you're trying to make,
Yeah.
parallels. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that stuff doesn't bother me. I'm comfortable in those conversations. But I think but I think using those examples specifically in this conversation does help kind of drive the point of what you're trying to make, which is that makes it effective, not
Mhm.
argumentative.
Yeah.
So, gosh, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to share? I feel like I've learned so much in the last like 50 minutes. But
Yeah,
I'm glad that I seem to be getting, at least as someone who is still relatively new to what you do, and
mhm.
you're the only person that I've followed or seen that does anything like that. So my exposure to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, is very new. I'm glad that I'm understanding it the way I think I'm supposed to be, which is kind of reassuring.
Yeah, no, I think you are, and I
Yeah,
also it's, I am quite heavy-handed about explaining everything, but like
yeah,
also it's like any art, like you look at it, and if you get something out of it, then that's great. I mean, it,
yeah,
people tend to, with visual art especially, and I feel like we don't do this as much with music and movies and books, but
yeah.
people tend to have this idea that there's a correct way to be into it, and there's a hierarchy, and
Yeah, yeah,
I just, if you see something you like, put it on the wall or enjoy it.
yeah, yeah,
There's no, what's in a museum is not better than what you're going to find at your local maker's fair.
yeah.
It's, it's good insofar as it sits on your wall and it brings you pleasure. And that's all that's, if you
It's
like the
meaningful
thing that
for
you're
you.
seeing, then you're doing it well. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that can fall under that whole concept of gatekeeping too. This
Yeah.
concept that like if you don't like you can't like, you can't be a horror fan if you don't like this franchise. You can't be a horror fan if you've never seen this movie. It's the same thing with really any media. Like it doesn't matter what it is. It's people trying to put this definitive like this is what it is and this is all it can be and this is the only way you're allowed to look at it.
Yes.
It's like, yes, well, that doesn't work. So,
Yeah. No, I've definitely seen some gatekeeping.
yeah.
I sort of came out of like the '90s kind of punk and
Yeah.
metal scene, so
Oh, yeah.
that if you want to see gatekeeping, those people will. Those people,
That's a frustrating one. I feel like I've seen that quite a bit. I have seen that quite a bit. Not so much with the indie writing community we were talking about earlier, but just in the horror fan world, it does seem to be kind of a common thing where they just have everybody has like, if I don't like something, and it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter if it's music, a movie, a book, a photograph, like I can still talk about it and be respectful and listen to another perspective. And sometimes, well, a lot of times I've done that and it's given me a new perspective and appreciation for something that I really didn't care for before. So I think that's a better way of going through life than to just be
Well,
like,
there are people producing amazing art of every
yeah,
genre, of every
yeah,
medium,
yeah,
of every like anything you can. There are brilliant horror novels. There are brilliant literary fiction novels.
yeah,
There's brilliant metal. There's brilliant house music. there in every little space there is someone doing something
Yeah.
that I think has value. Not necessarily everyone in every little space, but
I follow.
somewhere
Yeah.
there is something of value to be found, I think, in almost every.
Yeah. No, I like that. I agree. So do you consider yourself like a horror fan? Do you watch a lot of movies, read a lot of books?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm
Yeah.
definitely. I'm a little behind on my horror filmdom because I have a young kid, and it's hard to find time to sit through a
I
full
know.
movie uninterrupted. But yeah, I'm definitely a horror fan.
Yeah. So not to be like too ghost face, but what is your favorite? Like if you had to pick like a favorite horror,
Mm.
scary, whatever, what would you pick?
I, there's a part of me that wants to try and pick something really obscure and
Chad Lunsky, he's a horror author. I'm not sure if you know who he is or not, but he said the same thing when he was picking his movies. He was like, there was a part of me that was like, I don't want to pick something just to sound edgy, but
oh, somebody's already beaten me to the joke.
yeah.
You know what I'll say also in maybe more relevant in connection with the work. What I'll pick, I think, is Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. And this is kind of an entry level like horror film. This is this is going to be on
Yeah.
everyone's top 10 list.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw, I think, is really it's a really fascinating film because it's very subversive and it's very political. Like as I read the piece, it is very heavy-handed, like vegetarian propaganda. And I don't mean the word propaganda in a bad way here.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
It has a very clear and unsubtle messaging to it.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow it manages to work so well as a horror film that like an awful lot of people watch the movie and don't see the politics somehow.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of fascinating how it's able to take this really sort of pushy, moralizing stand and package it up in something that just really works as a horror film and is very popular and is very widely consumed.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really fascinating accomplishment, and it is a great piece of filmmaking if you just sit down and study it. It's a really well made movie. I guess the other film I'll mention on my sort of top 10 list, I guess I don't know if this is much more obscure than Texas Chainsaw, but the other one that definitely ranks up there for me is The Beyond, Fulci's The Beyond. It's kind of
I don't think I know that one.
It's kind of a Southern Gothic cosmic horror kind of thing. And it sort of comes out of that kind of surreal, very visual based like Italian tradition that Fulci and Argento were sort of doing. So it's kind of Lovecraftian, Southern Gothic.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing. It's very aesthetic and very visual heavy, and I think very beautiful. But also, like a lot of those movies, you don't want to linger too much on the sort of the logic of the plot.
Sure.
You want to let it sort of wash over you.
Yeah. Just enjoy. Just sit still and enjoy whatever happens.
I have a soft spot for that kind of thing in literature and in film. That sort of more abstract, just kind of let it happen sort of feeling.
Yeah. I'll have to look into that one. I haven't seen that. I don't know what that one is. At least I don't think I do. I feel like I would remember if I did.
It's an interesting movie. It's I don't know if everyone's gonna love it as much as I do.
That's cool. Well, this was a fun conversation. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you again for coming on and talking to me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. It's great to chat. I thank you so much for having me. This has been my first podcast, so hopefully
you did great. No, and you didn't tangent. I don't know, like if you felt like you did, but you didn't. Not as much as I was expecting. I did good too.
A thumbs up for both of us. We
get a pat on the back. Yeah. So, okay, cool. Well, yeah. When this, I'll put all of your information below. Is there another? I'm going to put your website and at least your Twitter. Is there any other place that you'd like me to link as far as where people can find your stuff or you? Or
Yeah, the website, I guess, would be the main thing. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
Instagram and Facebook.
You
Okay.
can send the things. I'm on all the stupid social things.
God, I know. It's just part of the nature of the beast.
I hate it, but you have to do it.
I know. Well, cool. Well, thanks again. Have a good night.
Thank you so much. You too.
Yeah, thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Yeah, so that was my artist conversation with Neal Och. Fascinating guy, very funny. Love him already. Yeah, make sure you check out his website. Look at his photographs, and I'll try to get the names of all the books that he mentioned that he did covers for as well. If you want to check those out, everything will be in the description below. I have quite a few more artists that I'm going to have on, and this was a lot of fun. I'm glad I decided to do this. Hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you in the next one.